So, my AP US history friends, I hope you are doing well studying for your Unit 7 test, Part 1. Remember, that goes from 1898 to the Roaring 20s, so mid-1920s or so. Just wanted to do a recap video to help you out before your test, so I'll post this up here today. And again, hopefully it's helpful. Email me if you got any questions. So overall, Unit 7 for the Part 1 test, really the things we're going to focus on is the establishment of big government and its growing control over business and the economy, as well as the rise of the United States militarily, politically, and socially, as well as economically into the world's superpower and the progression of rights of people. We start out by talking about the progressives and the progressive era, which is really using government to benefit the middle and lower classes, using government policies to help the common man, if you will. And you can see these in these political cartoons in the slides. Remember, it is not tied directly to a political party. While the progressives are the Republicans in the Teddy Roosevelt, William Howard Taft era, it really is just an ideology that shifts from political party to political party depending on the years. So at this point, the Republicans are the progressive party. But if you start getting into FDR in the 1930s, the Democrats really become the progressive party. So they do swing, right? We took a look at muckrakers. Again, the journalists that define the progressive era in the sense that they inform the public and then in turn the government about the issues that are plaguing the United States. So muckrakers like Upton Sinclair, who's probably your best example or easiest one to use in the meat packing industry as he writes the book The Jungle, which then leads to the passage of the Pure Food and Drug Act. Other muckrakers like Ida Wells making us aware of lynchings in the South, and Nellie Bly making us aware of treatment of prisoners and mentally ill people in asylums. So anyways, the muckrakers are really the catalyst or the kickoff of the progressive era because they inform the public. And as we can see here in this political cartoon, we have Teddy raking the muck, right? Muck meaning, bad word, right? But raking the muck in the meat scandal, right? Anywho, there are debates about how progressive to be. So even though it's the progressive era looking to help the common man, it's not until the end of this era that like women get the right to vote. You still have Jim Crow laws in the South. We're going to go through a period of imperialism. So does progressive ideas apply to people outside the United States? And then who should actually be in power? We see an increase in political participation through things like primary elections, where you get to select the candidate. Referendums and recalls that take place during these progressive presidents. There's a whole bunch of progressive laws that come into place. The two most important of which I would say for sure are the Sherman Antitrust Act and the Clayton Antitrust Act, which are going to be used to trust bust Teddy Roosevelt, big business. So the Sherman antitrust law had actually existed before this time period, but it wasn't really enforceable. And in fact, at first, the antitrust acts are used to attack big business. However, the Clayton Antitrust Act actually defines what a bad business is, so what bad business practices are, and then is used to attack big business and break up monopolies. We also have the Antiquities Act, which is going to work on the conservation side, the environment side, and the setup of the national parks. Really, the problem with Teddy Roosevelt, if you were to criticize him, is the idea that he picks and chooses which monopolies he thinks are good and bad. And as you can see in the political cartoon, he attacks the monopolies that are bad trusts and has like the good trust monopolies in the background. Remember, trust and monopoly are like synonyms. So if you see trust buster, it really means monopoly buster. We also have a series of progressive amendments that get passed that you definitely need to know. The 16th Amendment and federal income tax is going to pay for all these government programs the government wants to do to help the middle and lower classes. The 17th Amendment, the direct election of senators, and the 19th Amendment to the Constitution, the women's right to vote, both increase political participation in the era. And then you have prohibition, which is installed in the 18th Amendment and removed in the 21st Amendment. That whole era we'll talk about here in a bit. Well, you know what? We'll just cover it now. Prohibition is wildly a failure in all counts, mostly because of its inability to be enforced. And it leads to high levels of crime rate. Even though the government tries to enforce these laws, it leads to the formation of organized crime in the United States. It leads to like bootlegging alcohol, which leads to higher alcohol deaths. And we eventually remove the prohibition statute about 10 years, amendment about 10 years afterwards, mostly because we're in the middle of the Great Depression and we need tax revenue, but also because it's sort of an unenforceable law. We look at the Square deal. That's Teddy Roosevelt's domestic policy and William Howard Taft's as well. This idea of the three C's: conservation of natural resources, which is seen in the Antiquities Act, control of corporations, which is seen in the antitrust laws, and consumer protection in the Food and Drug Act. The United States also goes through imperialism in this time period, or the idea of conquering territories outside of the continental U.S. There are arguments for and against this, right? The arguments against imperialism is shown in this political cartoon and in many political cartoons. The idea that the United States is going to have to take care of immigrant populations, increasing the white man's burden, as well as the fact that it makes America a bit of a hypocrite. If we believe in self-determinism and the idea that people should establish governments for the people and by the people, we're not really doing that by taking over territories like Hawaii and Alaska, which, here's Alaska and Seward's Folly. We purchased that from Russia. And Hawaii, we use U.S. corporations, specifically the Dole Company, to take over the economy of Hawaii and eventually force them into annexing to the United States. The U.S. also fights wars to annex territory. The Spanish-American War, blame the Maine on Spain, which really gives us a whole bunch of control in Central and South America. It gives us Puerto Rico, the Philippines, the Virgin Islands, things like that, as well as Guam. But it also gives the United States status as the only major world power on the Western Hemisphere at that point, which means they can do things like the Panama Canal. We start a revolution in Colombia because now we're the only dominant power there. We can sort of run the whole show. We're going to start a revolution in Colombia for the Panamanians so fun to say, the Panamanians to take control of their own country and then eventually sign a lease deal with the United States to create the Panama Canal, which makes the U.S. The world trading dominant economic power of the Western Hemisphere. It really puts us on the map in that regard. We also take control of Cuba in the Platt Amendment. So we don't directly own Panama or Cuba, but we do show our influence in the sense that, again, building the Panama Canal, but also we basically run Cuba's political and economic sphere. They're not allowed to make treaties with other countries without asking the U.S. We have the ability to intervene in their country whenever we want, which again is shown in this political cartoon and Teddy Roosevelt's big stick diplomacy. The idea that if the United States constructs a large navy or large military presence, we act justly towards other nations. We never bluff in our actions, and when we strike hard, and the willingness to allow for other countries to save face so we don't create embarrassment going forward. Woodrow Wilson should have learned about that before signing the Treaty of Versailles. But anyways, the U.S. institutes big stick diplomacy. Again, this idea that we're the big bully on the block and nobody's going to mess with you as long as you know that we have the military to back it up. We also see the open door policy where the U.S. is going to keep China open for trade, stop it from being split up like Africa was by the Europeans, and instead keep China open for trade. So it's not a legal thing, but it's sort of the U.S. enforcement of policy, which can be seen in this political cartoon. And then Lady Liberty's new bonnet, or Columbia's Easter bonnet, the political cartoon here where we see the U.S. rising as a world power. This would definitely be under Unit 7 test. Couple other topics as we keep going. We discussed U.S. involvement in World War I. We don't have really notes for that, so I'll just talk about it really quick. But the U.S. gets involved in World War I due to this idea that we should continue to spread like manifest destiny, like democracy and capitalism, but also the sinking of the Lusitania, German U-boat activity. The Germans would argue that the United States was involved in this war and therefore could be attacked because they were selling weapons to Britain and France, which would make us, a part of that in the first place. Anti-communist beliefs, the idea that we should control the post-war peace talks because Russia just turned communist and that freaks us out. So we want to control to make sure that the rest of Europe does not turn to communism, as well as the Zimmerman telegram, the telegram sent by the Germans to the Mexican government trying to get them to start a war with the U.S. to distract us. So the U.S. is victorious in World War I. During that, though, we do have a whole bunch of World War I issues at home. The U.S. grabs a bunch of control over the economy and the political sphere. So we create like the Department of Energy and we put on quotas for how much companies need to produce. And we get rid of a whole bunch of labor union laws because all in the name of like supporting the war effort. We also limit civil liberties in the Supreme Court case Schenck versus the United States, which says that you do not have the right to freedom of speech if you are causing panics or it's against like national security. We also see the limitation of civil liberty and the Sedition Act, which is going to, again, say that you can't talk smack about the U.S., and the Palmer raids, where we are going to have the rounding up of communists and socialists, specifically Eugene Debs, who's a big union leader. Anyways, after the U.S. wins World War I, my apologies, we see a wave of nationalism, which does have some negative consequences. Like you see a large increase in the KKK membership and immigrant quotas that happen because the U.S. is feeling very like nationalistic. We do have a whole bunch of economic prosperity as the U.S. is one of the only world powers that's untouched by World War I, which does lead to corruption and excess. Check out Great Gatsby. Continued movement to urban areas from population, specifically the black population, moving to cities in the Great Migration, and modernism, including like new technologies like the radio and stuff like that. So anyways, we already covered prohibition, so I'm going to move quickly through that. There's some notes here if you want to pause it here and take a look if you didn't get those down. But we also have flapper culture. Women are going to start expressing themselves more liberally in the social sphere, cutting their hair, wearing shorter dresses, and being more involved, drinking alcohol, and being more involved in the social sphere. Remember, women are really the one that push for the 18th Amendment. They're linked, the 18th and 19th Amendments together. So anyways, the Roaring Twenties does lead to a whole bunch of political scandals. There's a lot of bribery of government officials, especially to look the other way during Prohibition. And the more famous example, the Teapot Dome scandal done by the Ohio Gang. Shout out that group of boys in the back of my 4A class that loves the Ohio Gang. This idea that they are going to take a bribe, the U.S. government is going to, or Albert Fall, specifically the Fall guy, takes a bribe for a company to drill in the Teapot Dome area. So it's an oil scandal bribe. Anyways, we shift back to a laissez-faire economy in the time period. We have a much more laissez-faire economy during the Gilded Age. We shift back to government-controlled during the Progressive Era, and then back to laissez-faire during the 1920s, which allows business to run rampant. We can even see that in the stock market absolute rise. During the 1920s, we have a 500% increase in the Dow Jones Industrial Average, which measures how the stock market is doing. So people are getting rich, people are getting wealthy on the stock market. Jobs are aplenty, all that good stuff. Consumerism's at an all-time high. Henry Ford's assembly line makes things cheaper. People are buying cars, people are buying radios, washing machines, irons. It really improves like the wealth. It improves, I'm sorry, not the wealth gap. It improves like the idea of like the at-home life. You have a lot more free time now, which leads to like the silent generation of authors. And again, women going out into the social sphere because there's a lot less at-home duties to do. It does, however, increase the wealth gap. And we are setting the seeds of the Great Depression, especially when people start buying things on credit. Lastly, we discussed Black America in this time period. We have the Great Migration. We're going to have the movement of Black Americans from the Jim Crow South to northern cities, which you could argue is like an increase in political participation as well, because now Black Americans can vote. They're no longer hampered by Jim Crow laws. And like there's much less skilled laborers necessary in the North. So if you were like a sharecropping farmer, you don't need to have industrial skills to go work in like a Henry Ford factory because, you know, you're only doing one task a million times a day. The Harlem Renaissance is the rise of Black culture in the United States. We see Black authors, jazz come out of the in popular culture, the rise of jazz music. We have a man named Marcus Garvey who leads the Back to Africa movement, this idea that Black America should get more in touch with their African roots and promote African culture. And then lastly, disgustingly, the Tulsa, Oklahoma riots, where we are going to see white society in Tulsa, Oklahoma burn down the businesses of the economically successful Black America in the time. And just here's a quick map of the Great Migration. So hopefully that helps.